The river had broken its banks 2 nights ago, pushing itself into lowland groves where roots could no longer hold firm. Along its muddy edge, driftwood collected in strange shapes. Most things moved, trembled, swayed, shifted, but one shape did not. Just beyond the bend, in a bend of slow water, something large lay against the pull of the current, too still to belong. It was a young elephant, barely old enough to be alone, yet here, half submerged and unmoving, its small trunk barely above the waterline, resting across the surface like a fallen reed. The ranger stood knee-deep in silty water, eyes fixed on the calf's ribs, searching for breath. There was no thrashing, no cries, just the sound of water tugging gently at the animal's side and the occasional slap of branches brushing past. The calf had likely slipped down the embankment during the night. The rains had turned firm ground into soft traps, and the river's sudden rise left no time for paths to dry. Its legs were folded beneath it at a wrong angle, not broken, but pinned. A groove in the mud suggested where it had tried to stand, once, maybe twice, before yielding to the pull of the silt. Around the bend, the forest held its breath. Even the birds stayed quiet, as if acknowledging that something here hung in balance. The ranger radioed in a brief report, voice low and steady, then approached further into the current, testing each step. The water tugged harder with every inch, wrapping around his thighs with an invisible force. He stopped within a few feet, squinting to read the calf's body. One ear moved, slow, weighted, and a thin line of bubbles traced from the calf's trunk. "It's okay, little one," the ranger murmured just once. There was no response, but in the silence that followed, the calf blinked. That blink held the weight of the entire moment. It was not hope, not panic, just presence, a quiet acknowledgement of another life nearby. The ranger dropped slowly to a crouch, arm extended but not reaching. The elephant's body bore no open wounds, but the water had drawn tight around its belly and haunch, pinning it between 2 half-submerged roots like a cradle of mud and wood. There would be no pulling without planning. No rush, no noise. Time would have to stretch. Behind him, 2 more rangers arrived, waiting carefully with rope and canvas slings. One paused at the sight of the calf's face, then looked away, not from disgust, but out of quiet respect. The calf's eye remained half-lidded, watching nothing. The river moved slowly in this section, but deceptively so. Below the surface, the suction held firm. The rangers began testing anchor points for the ropes, whispering between themselves, hands moving deliberately as if afraid the water might hear and rise again. Overhead, a lone heron drifted low and disappeared into the green. A few minutes later, a heavier ripple surged near the far shore. The mother had come. She stood high on a patch of raised earth, motionless and watching. Her ears flared wide once, then settled. She did not cry out. She did not charge. She only watched, the kind of watch that carried ancient memory. She had seen this before, somewhere in the long ancestral thread of her blood. One of the rangers lowered his voice further, barely above breath. "She's giving us time." In the calf's eye, something shifted. The ear flicked again. A long sigh escaped from its trunk, soft as mist. Its chest rose, shallow but steady, still alive, still aware, but fading. Twigs brushed against the ranger's boot. The river moved around them like a living thing. Not angry, just indifferent. And in that moment, it became clear that this rescue would not be swift. The river would not give the calf back easily. It would take time, and silence, and respect. The light began to change. Not sunset, not yet, but the hush that comes before it. Shadows stretched longer over the water. Somewhere upstream, a branch snapped. The ranger stayed still. He would not rush the next moment. For now, the calf was breathing. For now, that was enough. One boot sank deeper than the other as the ranger stepped forward, mud thick around his ankles, the river reluctant to let go of anything it had taken. The calf hadn't moved again. The folds of its soaked skin lay pressed into the water like bark softened by rain. Its trunk, draped over a tangle of roots, trembled just once. Not a call, not a gesture, only the involuntary ripple of something caught between breath and strain. Beside it, the current wrapped tightly around the body, slow but insistent, as though the water had learned how to hold without breaking. The rangers had begun to assess the edges, where they might place weight, where rope might hold, where even the smallest shift might free pressure without sliding the calf further down. But the mud was deep, deceptive, Every movement took something from them: balance, grip, time. They spoke softly, not for the calf's sake, but their own. In places like this, sound traveled too far. A misstep, a sudden splash could unravel fragile trust. The calf blinked again. That same heavy slowness, the eye not darting but still, as if conserving the little strength left. Its left hind leg was deeper now. The weight of water had forced it inward, under. A mat of reeds had wrapped around its flank. Beneath that, branches pressed into its ribs, woven into the river's invisible snare. Just beyond the clearing, the mother shifted her stance. Her front foot pressed into the earth only once, and her trunk lifted a fraction before dropping again. Her tail swung low, barely moving. No trumpet came. Her presence was firm but restrained, as if instinct whispered that the humans below were not there to harm, but to help. She had seen them before. Not these faces, perhaps, but this shape of movement, this hush. A rope was looped loosely over one of the thicker roots beside the calf's back. Another ranger moved into position with a canvas sling, soaked in river water to reduce friction. Hands moved slowly, never reaching across the animal's body, never from behind. Only in view, only where the calf might feel, in the dim corners of its awareness, that nothing would strike, nothing would pull. "Stay with us," one ranger murmured. The water moved across the surface with a hush, small waves slapping the sloped mud. A log drifted near and was pushed gently aside with a staff. They had tried to dig a channel, briefly, a slit in the bank that might ease suction, but the soil collapsed inward with a quiet finality, and the risk was too great. The river was not angry. It was simply holding on, not out of cruelty, but through the nature of how rivers behave when the land forgets its shape. The calf's ear flicked once and its eye rolled slightly. Its mouth opened, closed, and opened again. The movements shallow, fatigued. From the tree line, a low rumble passed through the air. The mother's voice, not urgent, not commanding, just sound, just presence. One of the ropes was adjusted again. The canvas wrapped with care beneath the calf's midsection, inch by inch. The rangers worked in pairs, one steadying the sling, one whispering updates. They had done this before, with buffalo, with zebra. But the river was different. Here the ground shifted without warning. They moved as if balancing against a breath. The sun slipped behind a thin veil of mist, light turning blue and silver. The trees cast longer shadows across the water. Still the calf did not cry out. Still it stayed. A heron called from upstream, its wings folding into reeds. In the distance the wind picked up and passed gently through the forest's edge. The elephant mother did not move. Her silence was neither patience nor fear. It was memory. Waiting had always been part of survival. The ranger nearest the calf laid a hand softly on its back, fingers pressing gently through the soaked skin, not to urge, not to test, only to say, in the language that required no words, that they had not left, that they were still here, that the river, for all its quiet strength, would not win without witness. The calf's eye closed for the first time, not in surrender, just rest. For a moment, just enough. The sling lay across the calf's belly, soaked and heavy but secure. The rangers leaned into the rope, testing it in silence, their bodies set against the current. Each pull was measured, each shift no more than the width of a hand. The calf stirred weakly, its trunk lifting once, brushing the surface of the water before sliding back. There was no panic in its movements now, only exhaustion. The river clung stubbornly, mud gripping its legs as if it had no intention of returning what it had claimed. The men worked in rhythm, shoulders rising and falling with the pull, voices kept to a whisper. One called out a steady count as they shifted weight, easing the calf forward inch by inch. The water, swollen from rains upstream, pressed harder with every attempt, curling against the animal's flanks. The rope strained but held. The calf groaned softly, a low sound that trembled through the air like a fading drumbeat. The mother answered from the bank with a long, deep rumble, the kind that carried reassurance but also fear. The light began to thin, sinking lower in the sky, painting the river's skin with dull gray. Every moment mattered more. Night would bring more danger, the river would swell, and vision would fade. The rangers knew the window to act was narrowing. Still, they refused to rush. The risk of forcing the calf free too quickly was greater than waiting, and so they pressed onward, steady, careful. "Easy now," one ranger murmured. The calf shifted slightly, a rear leg pulling free for just a second before sinking again. Mud closed over it like a fist. The rescuers adjusted their stance, tugging gently, giving slack when needed. Their boots slid in the silt, but they held each other upright, bodies forming a quiet chain of balance. Sweat mingled with the river water clinging to their skin. This was no battle, no triumph. It was a negotiation, one measured breath at a time. A sudden surge passed through the current. The rope snapped taut, forcing the rescuers to dig into the mud for grip. Water sloshed over their thighs, threatening to sweep them off balance. The calf let out a sharp guttural sound, brief but urgent, before falling still again. For a moment, all they could hear was the roar of water, stronger than before, as if the river itself had risen to remind them who held control. Dark clouds gathered at the edges of the horizon. The light shifted to a heavy blue, and the air carried the scent of new rain. The rangers exchanged glances. They had been working for hours, and now the river's strength was returning. The decision pressed close: continue to fight, risking both calf and men in the gathering dark, or hold until dawn and trust that the animal would have the strength to wait. The mother moved again on the ridge, stepping forward so her shadow stretched longer across the water. Her ears flared wide, then settled. She gave a single, low rumble, not loud, but filled with weight. The rangers stilled, listening. She did not move further down, but she did not leave either. Her body was as much a part of this effort as theirs, standing guard, silent and watchful. One ranger steadied the rope, breath drawn in, and shook his head slightly. They would not risk it now. Not when the river had grown bolder, not when the night was so near. Slowly they lowered tension, letting the sling cradle the calf's body without dragging it further. The animal's breathing was shallow, but it was breathing still. That was the line they would not cross, never to save in haste, only to save with care. The first drops of new rain touched the water, spreading circles that dissolved into the current. The calf's eye opened once, then closed again, its trunk lifting weakly, drawing one more sip of air. The rescuers stood in silence, rope in hand, while the forest darkened around them. The river's voice grew louder, but so did the quiet resolve that they would return when the world allowed another chance. For now, the night belonged to the water. The rain that had threatened finally broke in the early hours, soft at first and then steady, until the river itself seemed swollen with the sky's offering. The calf lay quieter now, its body half held by the sling, half surrendered to the weight of water. The rangers had worked through the night, their hands raw from rope and mud, their bodies chilled. Each attempt brought the calf a little forward, then stalled again as the river tightened its grip. Fatigue pressed into every motion, not only theirs but the animal's too. Its breaths came shallow, trunk lifting only to skim the surface, then falling again as if even air had become heavy. The men stood in silence, mud streaked to their waists, considering the dim light that crept through mist. Their eyes met, but few words passed between them. Each knew the same truth. Strength alone would not win against the current. It was a fragile balance. To push harder was to risk injury. To wait longer was to risk the calf's strength slipping away. In those hours, even the forest seemed subdued. The birds stayed hidden, their calls muffled. A stillness settled over the clearing, the kind that made time stretch, each moment carrying more weight than the last. Then came a sound, faint at first, like branches shifting beneath wind. It was heavier, deeper. The crack of undergrowth, the rustle of trunks brushed aside. The rangers turned their heads toward the forest edge. Out of the morning haze, shapes began to appear, tall and deliberate. One by one, elephants emerged from the line of trees, their silhouettes forming against the pale light. The matriarch first, wide-shouldered and calm, her ears folding forward with quiet authority. Behind her, younger bulls, cows, and calves, moving with unhurried certainty until the entire herd stood along the ridge above the river. The rangers froze, rope still in hand, every instinct sharpened. But the herd did not advance in anger. They did not trumpet or threaten. Instead, they stood as if anchored to the earth itself, lined in a broad curve that overlooked the flooded channel. Mist rose around their legs, giving them the stillness of statues. Their trunks lifted only slightly, tasting the air, acknowledging the scene below. The mother of the trapped calf rumbled, a sound that carried across the water, low enough to touch the chest more than the ear. She stepped forward from her place on the ridge and turned once toward her kin. No one followed her descent. Instead, they remained where they were, forming a silent wall along the forest's edge. Their presence was not restless, it was watchful. Downstream, two young bulls waded partway into the river, not close enough to intervene but near enough to break the current. Their bodies stood broad against the pull of water, as if instinct had called them to shield. The rangers exchanged a glance, an unspoken acknowledgment of something rare. The herd was not pressing them away. It was not turning its back. It was waiting, holding the line in a way that felt more deliberate than chance. In the soft gray light, it seemed as though the elephants themselves had gathered to steady the moment. The calf stirred again, lifting its trunk weakly, exhaling in a tired burst of bubbles. Its ear shifted, brushing against the sling. One ranger knelt, his hand brushing mud from the rope. "Almost there," he whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the rain. The matriarch lifted her trunk high, a slow arc against the sky, and the herd responded with silence. No trumpets, no calls, only stillness, as though they knew their presence alone lent strength. Time seemed to move differently then, the river's roar softened by that collective watch. The rangers felt the current shift slightly against their legs, broken and deflected by the bulls downstream. It gave them just enough, a margin to hold the calf steadier, a margin to breathe. The forest exhaled with them. Rain softened into mist again, drifting over the water's skin. The herd did not leave, did not falter. They stood, shoulder to shoulder, a line of patience stretching through the fog. And for the first time since the rescue began, the men felt they were not alone against the river. The first warmth of dawn spread thinly across the river, streaking the surface with pale gold that struggled to find shape through mist. The night's rain had slowed, leaving behind a hush broken only by the flow of water and the groans of strained rope. The calf lay heavy in the sling, its body trembling in quiet pulses, as though caught between surrender and survival. The rangers, mud-caked and unsteady, tightened their grip once more. They knew there could be no hesitation now. Hours of waiting, hours of effort, had narrowed into this fragile chance. With each pull, the canvas pressed tighter beneath the calf's ribs, coaxing it upward, coaxing it toward ground. The suction gave slowly, releasing a reluctant grip that had held all night. Mud slurped free with a sound that echoed louder than the men's breath. The calf groaned faintly, its trunk lifting toward the air in a wavering arc, then falling again against the sling. One of the rangers whispered as though speaking to the current itself. "Almost there." His words carried no force, only gentleness, the tone one might use to guide a child across unsteady earth. The herd remained in formation along the ridge, their broad shapes etched dark against the paling sky. The matriarch had not moved through the long hours, her stillness, as unshakable as stone. She watched with that patience only elephants seemed to hold, a patience that felt like memory stretching far beyond one night. The younger bulls downstream shifted slightly, water breaking at their legs, the current easing once more as their bulk carved a calmer channel. In that silence, the rescue gained its final edge. The rangers leaned together, a collective effort born not of strength but of persistence. The sling creaked, the ropes burned through their palms, and then, with one last pull, the calf's hindquarters broke free. Mud gave way in a sudden collapse, splashing river water up their legs. The calf lurched sideways, half rising on unsteady knees before sinking back, exhausted but clear of the worst of the river's hold. The men steadied it with their hands against its slick hide, guiding its body away from the slope. For a moment, the calf lay still in the shallow water, ribs rising in jagged breaths. Its ears twitched, lifting mud and droplets into the air. A shiver passed through its flanks, a visible tremor that spoke of fatigue as much as relief. Then, almost unwillingly, its front legs shifted forward. Its body leaned, stumbled, and slowly pushed up. The effort was raw and fragile, its knees folding awkwardly before catching. The calf swayed, then steadied, standing half-leaned against one of the roots. Its trunk curled low, drawing in a long, rattling pull of air. From the ridge the herd rumbled in unison, a low chorus that vibrated across water and earth. The mother moved first, descending toward the bank, her steps deliberate, her weight pressing prints deep into the softened ground. She did not rush, she did not trumpet, she simply came, her shadow falling long over the trembling calf. The rangers stepped back, releasing rope and sling, letting her fill the space that had been theirs through the long night. The calf stumbled again, then turned at the faint brush of her trunk. Their contact was brief, a soft touch across the calf's head, almost a nudge, almost a reassurance. It straightened, though unsteadily, as if that touch alone reminded it of direction. The mother circled slightly, her body placing itself between the calf and the river, her presence firm, immovable. With a final groan, the calf shifted forward onto the bank, its feet pressing into the wet earth. The herd above began to move again. One by one, elephants descended, their great feet finding purchase in softened soil. They did not crowd, did not rush toward the calf. They came in silence, encircling at a respectful distance as though their mere presence formed a shelter greater than any rope. The mist curled around them, their shapes fading in and out of light, massive yet soundless. The calf, still trembling, leaned lightly against its mother's flank, gathering strength in her shadow. The rangers remained at the water's edge, their bodies worn, soaked, but stilled by the sight. None reached forward again. None spoke. This moment belonged only to the herd. They had intervened with rope and patience, but the reunion was not theirs to hold. They could only watch as the calf, step by step, found its footing beneath the quiet guidance of family. The matriarch gave a final rumble, deep and resonant, before turning toward the forest. The herd followed in slow procession, their bodies slipping into mist until only outlines remained. The mother lingered last, her calf pressed close at her side. She stood a moment longer, ears lifting once toward the rangers, not in thanks but in acknowledgement, before disappearing into the trees with her kin. Silence returned to the riverbank. The ropes lay slack in the mud, the sling abandoned in the shallows. The rangers did not move at first. They let the quiet settle, let the weight of the moment root itself deep before any thought of leaving stirred. When at last they stepped away, it was with the slow tread of men who knew they had witnessed something greater than their own effort. Behind them, the earth bore new prints, small, unsteady, pressed close beside larger ones. The sound of their departure faded into forest hush, into wind sliding through wet grass, into the distant, almost imperceptible echo of a herd already moving deeper into shadow. The river carried on, indifferent, but the earth held the memory. The forest seemed to breathe again once the herd had vanished, as though it too had been holding still through the long ordeal. Mist clung to the trees, curling around the branches like smoke, then lifting gently as sunlight grew bolder. The river, once a force that claimed and resisted, now moved with quieter purpose, carrying leaves and broken reeds downstream. To the rangers, every sound was sharper, every detail etched into memory. The way the calf had stumbled forward, the way the mother's trunk had pressed lightly against its head, the way the herd had stood together without sound yet full of presence. They walked slowly back from the water's edge, boots sinking into softened soil. No one hurried. No one spoke. The night had stretched into something larger than exhaustion. It had become a passage, one that shifted not just the calf but the men who had stood alongside it. Their hands were raw from rope, their backs heavy from strain, yet there was no sense of burden. Instead, there was a quiet fullness, the kind that arrives only when life and death have balanced on a thread and the thread has held. In the mud, the tracks told the story more clearly than words. The deep grooves where the calf had fought against suction, the drag marks of rope, the pressed ovals of ranger boots all mingled with the fresh, larger imprints of the herd. A single line of small, unsteady steps wove beside the mother's larger trail, the two sets pressed almost as one. These prints stretched toward the forest, vanishing where grass began, but their impression lingered in the minds of those who had seen them formed. One ranger paused, turning his gaze upstream where the bulls had stood like barriers in the water. Their absence now made the current look stronger, less broken, yet it also reminded him of what had been offered. The herd had not saved the calf in the human sense of pulling and lifting, but their presence had shaped the rescue just as much as ropes and hands had. Together, two species had shared the weight of one fragile life. The air smelled of damp bark and fresh rain. Sunlight began to filter more strongly through the canopy, throwing fractured light across the clearing. Birds returned in scattered calls, tentative at first, then swelling into a morning chorus. Life resumed its rhythm, as it always did, but the rangers carried something that would not dissolve with the day. They knew rescues were rare in outcome, rarer still in the way this one had unfolded. Not as a story of men against river, but of patience against time, of herd and human aligned without words. They gathered their ropes and slings, tools now heavy with mud and memory. The canvas was torn in places, the fibers of the rope swollen from hours of strain. These were the quiet scars of the night, reminders that even survival bore its marks. One ranger coiled the rope carefully, as though unwilling to break the silence that still hung. Another glanced toward the tree line, as if expecting the herd to remain visible, but the forest had closed around them, their passage sealed by mist and distance. As they began the slow walk back toward their outpost, the river followed beside them, still wide, still restless, yet diminished in its power to intimidate. Behind them, the earth held prints that would fade in days, but for now they remained etched in damp soil, a testimony written not in words, but in footsteps. The calf's small track, pressed beside the mother's, was the last mark before the forest swallowed their trail. For the rangers, that final image remained. Not the struggle, not the ropes, not even the trembling collapse in water, but the sight of a calf rising to its feet, leaning into its mother's flank, and walking forward into trees that had been waiting to close around them. The memory would live long past the mist of morning, and though the forest moved on, though the river flowed indifferent, the quiet miracle of that night would always remain beneath the sound of wind and grass, beneath the call of birds at dawn, beneath the rhythm of soft earth carrying the weight of passing lives.